I want you just to think about where your emotions are when you set yourself up to start a diet or a healthy living regime or perhaps an intense exercise plan. I've worked with enough people over the years and obviously been through it myself that I know this can be quite an emotional time. So, what is the most common emotion that I normally notice in people, especially when they just start out? I think that emotion is grief. And it may sound like a bit of a strange word to use or to throw around when we're talking about nutritional things and body composition things, but I want you just to consider the meaning of grief in the first place. It's actually an intense sorrow for a loss. So you're probably still thinking to yourself, well, what's that got to do with diet, Scott? I don't understand. Well, I want you just to think about it for a second. I think when most people start a diet, is that they think about it in terms of food, or they think about it in terms of exercise, or in terms of just doing a little bit more healthy eating and all of those sorts of things. But what I want you to consider is that actually the word diet for a lot of people means transition. And transitions essentially mean taking you from one place to another place, very often leaving that old place behind. So it's completely normal that you get a sense of loss when perhaps you start a diet. Now, in a coaching environment, what I would normally want to explore if someone's experiencing this misery or sadness or sorrow and despair and all these sorts of feelings they might be getting, I want to explore what is it they've lost. Because that's really the basis of grief. Because they're worrying about what the potential they have to lose when they start a diet plan. So I had a little look through the internet and actually found the 5 stages of grief, which is actually used a lot in bereavement cases and things like that. And I thought, wow, so some of these things just apply so much to the journey that a lot of people go through, from, first of all, starting off in a stage of denial, where everything's okay and the diet's going to be fine and everything like that, but how it moves through to things like sorrow and bargaining and eventually acceptance. And eventually when it comes to diets and successful diets and free eating and being able to have all the confidence that you can, is that essentially we need to get you through those 5 stages of grief, taking a diet from something of despair and angst and sorrow and turning it into something of acceptance where it no longer has any power over you and makes your life difficult in any way. So let's have a little run through stage by stage the 5 stages of grief and how it applies to nutrition, diets and physical transformation. So I want to discuss the first stage of grief, which is denial, which essentially is denying something is true. So when it comes to denial, how does that actually apply in the whole nutritional sense? Well, I want to think about where you were in your headspace when you actually started a diet last time. For most people, in the first couple of weeks, you get this weird sense of excitement, this weird sense of motivation, something that you think is never going to stop throughout your whole dietary transition or physical transformation that you're making. And the thing about denial is that very often when we're talking about our diet is that our head and our intention is in exactly the right place. Because when people are asking us, are you finding it hard? Are you finding it difficult? Is it hard to prepare all the food? Is that we're almost in this state of, no, it's fine. Everything's absolutely fine. Everything's great. I'm really enjoying preparing all my food. I love eating chicken. This is great. This is perfect. This is wonderful. It's a stage of denial because we all know that, especially if we've come from an eating background which isn't like that, is that this stage is bloody hard, right? So when you're trying to take all of those old habits that you've built up over 10, 20, 30 years, is it suddenly transitioning into a plan that's slightly restrictive and actually making you watch your calories or watching your intake or watching your portion sizes and all that sort of stuff, is that actually we're in a state of denial. Because what essentially happens is that we are denying what reality is. We are denying that it's hard. And this actually is the first stage of grief that most people go through when it comes to bereavement, is denial. So actually the same sort of thing goes when it comes to nutrition, is that actually we start off in this stage of denial. You might find yourself right here, right now. But don't panic, there is going to be the next stage, which is going to eventually lead us on to acceptance. So the next stage of our dietary grieving process, or dietary stage of grief. So the next stage of the stages of grief, or our dietary grievance procedure, is anger. And it's probably an emotion that you don't want to think you have to go through when it comes to transforming your body. Maybe you've already come from a place of anger, so you actually got started in the first place because you were angry at yourself, or angry at your situation, or angry at someone else. So why would you want to experience anger when it comes to an ongoing diet? Well, I'll tell you, my friend, because anger's an interesting one, because you'll probably find that as you get a couple more weeks into your diet, maybe kind of 4 to 8 weeks sort of range, especially if you've kept it going that long, you just start getting angry about little things. Like, first of all, you're going to find that because you have been restricting yourself on a diet, is that you're normally going to find that every single time you get an element of stress pop into your life or something unexpected, is that that old behaviour routine that's associated with anger is that you'd normally switch to food. So you're going to find that you kind of these emotions tend to come up more, because the more you restrict yourself, the more the anger comes up, which the more you crave food. Which is really interesting for why we get a lot of clients, especially around that kind of 6 to 8 week mark, start complaining that their cravings are coming back. And it's normally because they're restricting themselves, which is kind of interesting. But the other reason that anger comes in is because we've just come through that first initial stage of denial where everything is wonderful and everything is great and I'm so motivated and I can't wait to be fit and all of these sorts of things. Because when you've held up that front for so long, is that actually it generates this inner anger in yourself anyway, because you're angry at yourself when you fall off track. You're angry at looking stupid in front of people. So you have quite a big lot of anger just going on right now. But also, I think the thing that completely rings true for me is that especially when you start seeing results coming from the plan that you have chosen, whatever that may be, is that half of you wants to actually stick to the plan because you know it works, you know it's going to give you what you want. But half of you is angry because you've realised that you can't eat like a normal person. And I remember saying this over and over again. I wish I could eat like a normal person. And this is the interesting thing when it comes to anger, is that actually part of this whole dietary transition requires you to go through this anger stage and back out the other side, which is going to lead us into bargaining in just a second. But the thing that I want you just to recognise here is that anger is actually very much part of a dietary transition or a dietary journey. It's just one of those stages you're going to need to go through, because I think this is one area that most people, because they don't experience a lot of anger in their life and they don't know how to deal with it, is this is what throws them off track, throws them off the wagon, because it seems like it's not worth it. Now, the third phase of this grievance procedure is known as bargaining. And again, you're probably wondering to yourself, what has bargaining got to do with diet, Scott? I've never got to this stage of bargaining before. Well, it's certainly a stage that I recognise too. The whole idea behind bargaining is essentially bending the rules just a little bit. And this is something that I see all the time with people, is that you started off and you've got this plan. Remember, you've been through the denial phase where everything is exciting, everything is awesome, nothing's going to bring you down, you're going to get through this no problem at all, champ. We've then got into anger and we've realised that actually the whole effort that we're making is actually quite difficult and it's quite hard, and we're getting angry at ourselves, we're getting angry at other people, and we're getting angry at the whole idea that we're going to get judged for failing. So anger is definitely part of it. So once we've been completely royally ticked off, we've gone through that excitement stage and we're getting angry about just being on a diet in general now, is that actually we get to this next stage, which is bargaining. Now, the whole idea of bargaining is that when we just start trying to work out how we could possibly have some of the things that we like in our diet, and it starts off that you might start off with maybe a cheat meal once a week, or maybe you'll have a little cheat meal once a day, or maybe you'll try and find some recipes to eat all the foods that you used to love that normal people like yourself used to eat and can't anymore. And I went through that stage a hell of a lot. I mean, I remember trying to make recipes for all sorts of bad foods that I loved. I remember trying to make KFC out of cornflakes. I remember trying to make pizzas out of weird flours and doughs and all of these sorts of things. And the thing that we have to realise at this bargaining stage is that it's completely natural and that this happens. And it's normally where you're going to find you're going to hit a bit of a plateau as well, because you're not really following your plan as you intended anymore, because you're letting too many of the slips in. But again, it's one of those phases that you just have to keep moving through, because as we move on to that, we're going to move into an excellent phase known as sorrow in a second, but eventually we get on to acceptance, which is where dietary success really comes from. So after denial, and after anger, and after acceptance, you actually get onto this next stage, which is not the nicest ones to go through, but it's almost, well, it's known as sadness, but it actually feels kind of sad too, because it's almost when you start getting your eyes opened up to what life is going to look like now and what life is going to be like. I think this is where actually people experience the most grief, because it's that realisation that these new habits that they've brought into their life is going to change their life for the better. And they are going to feel more confident, and they are going to lose weight, and they are going to feel better about themselves if they just keep going. And why sorrow? Well, why is that word thrown in there around this stage? Well, it's because this is a stage where most people, especially people who have actually managed to completely transition their lives and actually get the results they want, is the stage of realization where they basically have started to put new habits in place. So they naturally have just started almost with force having to skip dessert now, because they know it's not going to impact their goals and all these sorts of things. They perhaps don't go out as drinking as much. They perhaps go for a little bit of social isolation because they've realised that the actual friends that they hang out with aren't as suitable as they used to be, especially if they want to transition through to their goal. So you're going to find that kind of this sorrow phase does come about. But again, it's just one of those things, is that if your intention is intention is in the right place of where you want to go, you're going to find that you will soar through this stage quickly. But I think it's really important. This was not one of the happiest times that I went through, this whole sorrow period. But it's one of those periods where actually it shapes kind of how much you can stick to it in the long run and actually get onto this acceptance phase, which allows you to keep these habits for life. So if you're going through that sorrow phase at the moment, where you're getting that realization that you do have to make a choice eventually to choose you as your main priority, is that you will get through it and you will get to out the other side and actually make sure that you get to this acceptance stage, which you will suddenly find frees you up completely. The final stage is acceptance. And if you're one of the people who's watching this video and you've been through all of the other stages, or perhaps you're stuck in one of those stages right now, whether it's anger, whether it's denial, whether it's bargaining, all of these sorts of things, because everyone's going to be on different stages at different parts in their life, is that I want to assure you is that when you do eventually reach this stage of acceptance, life becomes easier. I almost call this phase mastery as well, because it's when you have enough knowledge of what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're going to do it, and all of these sorts of factors, is that actually you get this inner confidence that you've got your own back. You know what to do. It's not about depriving yourself. It's actually about believing in yourself and actually accepting yourself for this new stage of life that's about to come at you. And actually, it's loving yourself in the best way, really, because you're doing all the right things for you. And I think it takes a long time to get to this acceptance phase, but the longer you spend your time in this acceptance phase, where actually you work out that everything fits into your diary perfectly, batch cooking is just a thing of the past. You don't even call it batch cooking, you just call it cooking. You have a chocolate bar every now and again, and you know that there's no guilt to go with that or anything like that. You can just keep moving forwards. That is what acceptance is. That's what free eating is about. You're not going to go out for a meal and start studying menus anymore, because you know what foods look like. You know what real food looks like. You know what beige food looks like, and you know which ones to avoid and which not to avoid. But you don't look at it in the same mindset. You don't look at it like deprivation anymore. You actually look at it just as normal life. And this is the stage that I really want everybody to get to, is acceptance. Because suddenly you get rid of all the guilt, you get rid of all the shame, you get rid of all the anger, you get rid of all the judgment, because you're just being normal. This is your new normal. You've transitioned, you've changed, you've grown. And yes, you may have left a few people behind, you may have left some old habits behind, but you're still you. You've just grown. And this is almost the most exciting part of the journey, and one that I really hope everybody gets to, because once you get to this stage, you never really need to consider going on a diet ever again. So my friends, out of all of these different stages that potentially you could go through when you're going through a transition or going through a transformational journey, the thing I want you to remember is that you're going to have to go through some hard emotions. It's not easy, it's not happy clappy, it's not going to be awesome all the time. But to get from this learning stage, from where perhaps you're starting to become a master of your nutrition, your body, your life, is that you're going to have to go through these stages bit by bit, bit by bit. But hopefully this video has just shown you in some way that the stage that you're at right now is 100% normal. And hopefully it's just opened your eyes a little bit to the next stage and what that's going to look like. Hopefully it's a little bit more optimistic than the stage that you're currently in. But this is my experience of the dietary journey, and I hope that it's actually helped or enlightened you in some way so that you can actually get a nice breeze through journey all the way to the end and finally become a master of yourself and your body, so that you don't need to worry about all the things that perhaps are going through your head right now. So Scott Marsh, the Mind Body Mentor, out for today, and I hope this has helped in some way.